So it finally happened. Several days ago, the Pokemon Company unveiled their teaser for the latest Pokemon Legends game project, Pokemon ZA. The second entry in the mainline Legends games series, set entirely within Lumiose City. To say this has been a long time coming has been an understatement. Despite the unexpected nature of this announcement when compared to a potential Legends Johto or Unova title, I think you would be hard-pressed to find a Pokemon fan who's not really excited about this. For over a decade, it was the only Pokemon region without either a remake, a third version, a Legends game, or corresponding DLC. Some of the franchise's greatest moments, ranging from the lore about AZ, the Ultimate Weapon, and of course Mega Evolution, were completely orphaned after 2013. Their absence up to this point has been completely maddening, to the point where it's driven the fandom wild, forcing them to fill in the gaps with rampant speculation, some of which borders on obsessive fanfiction. So anyways, the million-dollar question of the day, will Pokemon ZA fulfill any of these missing gaps? Frankly, we don't know. And a big reason why is because beyond the geographical locale of Lumiose City, we frankly don't know a single shred of information about this game, ranging from the game mechanics to the time period, and of course the rosters of characters and Pokemon. It actually might be the least we know about any confirmed Pokemon game ever, since at least with prior titles, we kind of knew what to expect from the mainline series formula, and if it was a remake, well, we knew what was going to happen there too. Because with Pokemon Legends Arceus as well, the teaser trailer there was very substantive. However, we did get some key clues from this 2-minute presentation last week, featuring a mix of blueprint-like graphics, and of course the title reveal and Mega Evolution Stinger. So today we'll be embarking on a mission. I will be giving a dual theory and kind of wish list, meaning I will give the specifics of the game that I would like to see and experience personally, but also one that I feel like is realistic and totally falls in line with what we would expect from a Pokemon Legends game entry, given the shallow pool of precedents we have so far with just one other game. Without further ado, let's get into it. First and foremost, you cannot have a game without a setting. Like I said, we only know half of it right now. The place, which is Lumiose City, but we don't know when in its history this game takes place. Because it's a Legends game, of course, there's speculation that this could take place in the distant past, perhaps around what we know so far, the ancient medieval-like war with AZ, the Ultimate Weapon, which we know happened 3,000 years ago. Well, we look back at the trailer and we see old hand-drawn schematics, the likes of which seem to roughly correspond with the 18th or 19th centuries, which I think totally works, given that we see it's called the Lumiose Redevelopment Plan. But why? Why would Lumiose need to be redeveloped if it's that close to the modern day? Wouldn't it already be a city? Well, just as in the real world, I don't think the reason is that dramatic. Just with any city, it needs to be redesigned to stay modern. So for some historical context, for the basis of my theory, let's turn to real-life Paris 150 years ago. The Paris we know and love today is actually very new compared to a lot of European cityscapes. When you think Paris now, you're looking at a city that was roughly totally redesigned in the late 1800s. This was largely thanks to politician and urban designer Georges Eugène Haussmann, who served under the Emperor Napoleon III. He oversaw the razing, and I mean razing as in destroyed, of many of the city's old urban centers, which were crowded, ugly, unsanitary, and just dangerous for habitation. It's no wonder that Haussmann saw this as an opportunity to liven a city that desperately needed it. Under instruction from the Emperor, Haussmann was able to redevelop Paris into what we know it is today, a city with a lot of efficient, big boulevards that are bright, full of greenery, and really easy to traverse, a world-class public transit system, plenty of green spaces that provide third spaces for people of all classes, such as parks and gardens and fountains and squares, and of course aesthetic beauty through unified architecture. that provide a bunch of examples of mixed-use developments, ranging from luxury apartments to bakeries. Doesn't this sound familiar to the aesthetics of a certain city in the Pokemon world? Regardless, Hausmann was able to do this all very efficiently, and it wasn't just because of the appropriate management of public funds. It was because of the technology at the time. This was the late 1800s, and science had come a long way. Hausmann appointed qualified engineers to build new pipes, aqueducts, and tunnels under the city that were able to power the massive population and give them working trains, electrical grids, gas lamps, and of course fresh water for nearly every home. It's probably because of this massive infrastructure that Paris now has its current name, the City of Lights, which coincidentally is what we call Lumiose City. Lumos, as in light. It's in part thanks to Hausmann and the general technological boom of the time that we look back at this period of French history, and especially Parisian history, as what's known as the Belle Époque, or beautiful period. It reminds you of a certain Pokemon character's values, no? But in real life, this was a perfect storm for France. There was internal peace, there were successful colonial expansions, which mean the country was more affluent than ever, and of course there was a huge wave of technological and artistic expressions that came out of this new, booming, redeveloped city almost every single day. The Eiffel Tower was even built during this period and unveiled at the Grand Exposition of 1889. This was a bit after the Industrial Revolution, when all these new technologies were bulky, polluting, spewing smoke and sludge out into rivers like in Victorian London. No, this was the turn of the century, a bit later, where Paris proudly showcased a way to democratize technology for the most part, in an aesthetic and a triumphant way. I can't speak to this fully as a non-French person, but I believe this is kind of the period that we think of when we think of the look of French culture and society, and certainly is the basis for how it's depicted in the media for the most part. So why am I telling you this? Well, this is undoubtedly the basis on which another piece of media, Pokemon X and Y, is founded. Themes of beauty, pride, civic cooperation, a reverence for history, but a longing for modern extravagance and glory. So plain and simple, a Pokemon game based on this period of French history just works. Anywhere from the start of Hausmann's renovations in 1853 to the outset of World War I in 1914. So we'll kind of go to the middle and say this Pokemon Legends ZA takes place roughly in 1880 or 1890. This would actually correspond closely to Pokemon Legends Arceus's Meiji period, which takes place around 1870. That means that we could have a crossover between characters, technology, or even plot elements, but we'll focus on the thematic significance of this time period decision a bit later, because I think that's a little more interesting. So we have our time, now we have our place. Let's get into why you're probably here, the story. Jumping right into it, I think this game would start you off in Lumiose City on the South Boulevard. The building that will one day be known as Sycamore's Pokemon Research Lab is home to the Urban Redevelopment Group, led by the eccentric, we'll call him Eugene, an ancestor of, you guessed it, Lysander. He's a civil engineer appointed by the then mayor of Lumiose City, an ancestor of Diantha, to beautify the city. It needs extensive modernization because the city is narrow, overcrowded, poorly designed, and generally filthy because it's just a bunch of medieval buildings that have been standing since war times, since AZ's era. Now that technology from other regions and manufacturing methods have been brought over to Kalos, the mayor, who we'll call Chrysantha, has decided that it's time to bring some zest, or extravagance? What's the word I'm looking for? Oh right, flair, to Lumiose City. That's the name of the current mission that the Urban Redevelopment Group is doing. It's called Project Flare. The mission is to carry out this modernization project as quickly as possible in preparation for the World Exposition, which is set to happen at the end of the year at the mandate of the mayor. This will be a giant festival full of technological marvels and showcases, and it's going to host dignitaries and other affluent individuals from basically every Pokemon region that Kalos at the time has relations with. So here you are. You're a young intern in Eugene's office, an ancestor of either Callum or Serena, and progress has been pretty slow up to this point, with human workers being the ones laying pipes and redigging roads and doing all the manual labor. But Eugene has a new vision, using the power of Pokemon to speed things up. A few months ago, the mayor's office got a visit from an older gentleman from another region called Hisui, and with him he brought these little devices that he calls Pokeballs. Eugene's team worked hard at kind of modernizing these devices a little bit, maybe kind of a halfway between the Hisuian balls that we see and the modern steel ones. But the point is, this is 10 to 30 years after the events of Pokemon Legends Arceus, so the concept of Pokemon ownership is not a novelty at this point. A lot of people do it. But these balls are still very hard to come by and have certainly never been used in a large-scale public works project like this. But Eugene's vision is for you, a talented trainer, to either use these Pokeballs to contain and relocate troublesome Pokemon that are taking up room in the outer parts of the city, so that you have room to redevelop, or using them to help you in tasks, because elemental powers of Pokemon are simply more formidable than any human labor. And this would be the bulk of the game. You set out in Lumio City, traveling along the city's many streets, alleyways, boulevards, and even outer pastures, lakes, rivers, streams, gardens, and even underground tunnels to help out Project Fled. To this end, you are assigned a starter Pokemon. Yes, I did just show the Core 3 Kalos starters on screen, and yes, I did hear your collective.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
As fun as it was to get a kind of collage of 3 different starters from 3 different regions in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I just don't think that's going to happen again. Nor should it be expected to happen again just because it happened in one Legends game prior. One example does not a pattern make. And plus, I feel like there's decent reasoning for including the Kalos starters, the main one being they're criminally overlooked. I mean, come on. They're the only trio besides, I think, Generation 4 to not have any custom moves, forms, or otherwise enhancements. I know Ash Greninja is a thing, but come on. There's no better place to bring them back and give them the Mega Evolutions that they've deserved for now 11 years. And plus, I think it's appropriate for the world building parameters I gave this version of Kalos. As I said, this is much more developed than Hisui is. It's fair to assume that here, the native trio has been successfully domesticated for generations now. Probably one of the only species of Pokemon to be that way. So it would be fitting that the government office would keep a batch of the 3 at any given time, you know, to give their interns widely understood and closely studied Pokemon rather than 3 wild cards from another region, which at the end of the day would be invasive species. So, the plot. I have little to say about specific elements like characters or plot beats, because again, I'm trying to avoid blatant fan fiction. I'm just going to establish the framework of this story as best as I can. So let's focus on the gameplay loop. As I said, you're adventuring all across Lumio City, which is a massive map here. There would probably be a large perimeter outer wall, with miles of paddocks for ranches and farms and even undeveloped meadows and ponds. Then you move further into the medieval core of the city with the newly developed big boulevards that form a spoke out of the center, and of course the dense center core. Your job is to basically fulfill a never-ending list of tasks coming from both Eugene and random citizens, since you're a public bureau. Perhaps one person has just moved to Lumio City with his family and he's looking to open a bakery. So your job is to go out into the outer pastures and catch a wild Litleo to be the Pokemon that fuels the oven in the bakery and allows the business to thrive. You then decide where the bakery is going to be placed. Or maybe you would get a task from Eugene, who would tell you that he wants to build a public transit system in the city, so you go out and catch some Skiddo, who serve as the first fleet of the Go-Go shuttle. I imagine your large stock of Pokeballs would allow you to either permanently capture a Pokemon to use for yourself on your team, and that could help you with tasks directly, or you could catch Pokemon and permanently assign them to do a job somewhere. Maybe you catch a Pelipper that can run deliveries. Maybe you tame the Milotic that live in the river to put out fires from the bakery. The point is, it would be up to you to decide which of these endlessly replenishing tasks to do, because the point isn't to do all these tasks. The point is to do the ones that you want to do and customize the city to your liking and your sensibility, all the while getting passive feedback from citizens through both kind of public appeal ratings to see how happy they are, and also, of course, income, which would increase the budget for all the projects that you do. It wouldn't be about task completion, but rather about strategy. Maybe you build a bunch of luxury apartments and boutique shops on Magenta Boulevard, but you don't assign any Pokemon to be the guards to help the police officers around, and you don't assign a police precinct there either. So all the shops get burglarized, and thus the happiness satisfaction score of Magenta Boulevard just plummets. I imagine there would be other specifics like battles and rivals and maybe even something akin to a gym system, but I can't really speak to that. That's par for the course for a Pokemon game, and I'm more interested in the elements that would be new and unexpected. So I'm going to keep going with those. So your boss Eugene would be very excited about all the new development that is going on in the city. He celebrates this collaboration between man and Pokemon, feeling inspired that Pokemon have a purpose in this modernized city. Meanwhile, Chrysantha would be slightly more uneasy about this, perhaps expressing the belief that Pokemon are unruly, dirty, and uncivilized creatures that have no place in a modern city, and she disapproves of Eugene's plan. I imagine even more conflict brews throughout the game in the form of mysterious stones that you find every time you unearth a new city block for development. They're just lying in the soil. Despite Eugene's hesitancy, Chrysantha forces you to use them to power whole electrical grids or machinery. Yet they seem to have the added side effect of enraging wild Pokemon, transforming them into very dangerous new forms that go on rampages around city blocks. That's up to you and Eugene to defeat. These would be Mega Pokemon, both returning beloved ones and of course new forms. This would be, in the real-time combat system, pretty similar to Pokemon Legends Arceus. At the same time, it seems like the more you develop, the more Mega Pokemon are on the loose. And not only that, but a mysterious green Pokemon that seems to attack you. 10% Zygarde, 50% Zygarde, and maybe a 25 or 35% form. That would be also new and cool to see. At Eugene's suggestion, you come to research these phenomena. You understand that these stones are Mega Stones, and they're actually irradiated fallout from the ultimate weapon said to have been used by the King AZ 3,000 years ago. And you understand that Zygarde is a legendary Pokemon who is essentially the god of the ecosystem. Could these two things be connected, and could there be more fleshed out lore about the Ancient War? Perhaps, and I would love to hear your theories because I don't have all too much. I'm just focused on the game as it is now, rather than fleshing out ancient lore as much as I would love to. I just couldn't come up with a great idea. Regardless, you come very close to completing the vision of the town, transforming it, in spite of all these conflicts, into the booming metropolis that Eugene and Chrysantha always wanted. I imagine the climax of this game would feature the celebration of the end of these projects and the unveiling of the World Exposition. At this ceremony, you would see the unveiling of the magnum opus project, and probably the final one that you helped facilitate, the illumination of Prism Tower. At this bustling festival, the ecosystem Pokemon Zygarde reappears once again in its 100% form, and it would scale the tower King Kong style, and you would have to defeat it in some aerial real-time combat, which I think would be really cool. Thanks to your studies, you come to understand that this Pokemon is just enraged at all the rampant development that has completely swallowed the green pastures that Lumio City once was. Despite your best efforts to preserve parks and landscapes, at the end of the day, it has come at the expense of natural Pokemon habitats, and caused a huge disruption to natural order that Zygarde has no choice but to try to restore. After all, you've built the largest human settlement in the Pokemon world to date, so no doubt there would be some consequences. Perhaps this would be known by Chrysantha, who ultimately would be the villain of this story, who sought to summon Zygarde and destroy it once and for all, asserting her dominance over this metropolis and the natural world all at once. I think that would be an interesting angle to take. With that, the story would be complete once you defeat Zygarde and Chrysantha, and I imagine there would be a little post-game section where you kind of make some final tweaks to the town to ensure that it is actually sustainable and fulfill Zygarde's requests. But like I said, I'm interested in the meaning of this. Why are we telling this story? Well, let's go back to the background that I provided, both about Legends Arceus and Real World Paris. Legends Arceus was the origin of Pokemon battling and catching, at least in an organized fashion. The partnership between Pokemon and humanity was highly celebrated, as was the slow but sure colonization of the wild landscapes of Hisui. Conquering the natural world was presented as a virtue, something to strive for. In real life, we have that Belle Epoque period. Post-industrial revolution, where human advancement is really seen as a force for good, a noble and sophisticated thing to do. Despite the fact that the technologies that facilitated this period of prosperity, namely burning fossil fuels, oil, and coal, are basically the start of the spike of climate change that we see today, that is basically an irreversible effect on our ecosystem. But of course, sustainability was not something that the people back then that were just excited about gas lamps, natural lights, metro cars, and factory production even had the framework to understand. By asserting Zygarde into our story here in ZA, it essentially fast-tracks that reckoning for humanity. A force of nature itself basically begging us and forcing us to change our approach, to think a few steps ahead about how we can do these things that won't be at the expense of the natural environment. But I'm not trying to preach at you and say that all human development is bad. Certainly the opposite. I mean, the Pokemon world that we see is a largely utopic one, and it's due to that balance of technology and natural life. Each one seems to have an understanding that both can coexist and aren't mutually exclusive. We can preserve and develop both just by being mindful of our encroachment of the natural world. So I think this game, another Legends entry, can showcase another origin for the people of the Pokemon world. This time, the origin of cities and technology, and our very concept of making them the best they can be, not only for Pokemon, but people. That's why I think it would be crucial to have Chrysantha here, basically an evil foil to this prevailing theme. She would be a stand-in for all the worst parts of human development, ones that are sadly kind of the par for the course in our real world. The idea that capitalistic growth can just grow on forever like a cancer. The idea that we can just consume both natural resources and produced goods. That human life is more important than anything the natural world can offer. A notion fueled by both greed and ego. It resonates with the themes of Pokemon X and Y. Because beauty and decadence, as I said, are things to strive for. It's what makes humanity a beautiful thing, that we have the capacity to understand these things and appreciate them. It is noble to want to create a beautiful world for both us and future generations, but that idea can go way too far, way too fast. This Lysander ancestor Eugene would be vital to this theme as well, serving as our voice of reason and a more balanced mind. Ultimately in X and Y, we'd see how his descendant tragically wouldn't share this idea, turning more corrupt and more towards the vision of that Diantha ancestor. But here, he would be one of the first people to have that utopic vision for our future, one that not only cherishes but truly understands the limitation that we can thrive so long as we honor that we share this world with Pokemon, and we have to do everything we can to care for them as our lifelong partners on this quickly modernizing Earth. So there you have it. There is my pitch for Pokemon Legends ZA. Primarily what I would want from the still unknown setting, the themes that it would provide, and the gameplay loop. Would you want to see this game ultimately a city building RPG with themes of beauty, advancement, greed, and survival? Let me know down below what you would think of this. And of course, what your own ideas are if there's something totally different. I want to hear it. Thank you for indulging me once again in what was a very lengthy discussion about something Kalos. Thank you to all my patrons, especially Guardian patron Dayton Weezy and N Win. And of course, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for more content.